Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, Yemen seems to be our top news story today, with new airstrikes and some new players in a war where civilians have been taking the brunt of the beating. Also, Vladimir Putin fires back on allegations that Russia was responsible for the attack on that aid convoy that we reported on recently. And Hillary Clinton calling America exceptional. Well, we'll hear some of the views on that. All these stories and more, but first, a covert cyber attack. Now, just hours after the Secretary of State John Kerry called for both Russia and Syria governments to face a war crimes investigation concerning attacks on civilians of Aleppo, the Obama administration formally accused the Russian government of stealing and disclosing emails from the Democratic National Committee, as well as a range of other institutions and prominent individuals. Now, James R. Clapper Jr., the Department of Homeland Security, said the leaked emails were, quote, intended to interfere with the U.S. election process.
Interesting. An unprecedented retaliation by the U.S. government is now being planned, as reported first by NBC News. High-level sources have disclosed details of a CIA-led cyber attack against Russian computer systems, which could target the Russian leadership itself, namely Vladimir Putin, among others.
NBC News has learned the CIA is in the initial phase of a wide-ranging cyber retaliation, designed to be both clandestine and embarrassing to those being attacked. Now, if the White House gives the order, the CIA could manipulate things as specific as banking accounts and personal phones for those in the Kremlin government. So they're definitely going to want to send a message here.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. A former Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, retired Admiral James Stavridis, explains how this is damaging. Well, he said there's a great deal of offshore money that has moved out of Russia through the hands of oligarchs, and it would be extremely embarrassing if that were revealed. And doing so would be a way of having a proportional response to what we have seen. So in other words, Jeff, retaliation, a proportional response to that.
This covert operation is reportedly being run by a group inside the CIA, which is super secret. Top secret documents reveal that they have a staff of hundreds and a budget in the hundreds of millions. Now, in undertaking such a secretive campaign, the U.S. is wanting to send a message to Russia to back off.
Well, it's not too secret. Well, there are officials in the intelligence community who believe the U.S. response to the alleged Russian cyber hacking of the election should be open for everybody to see, and include a persuasion campaign designed to inform the Russian people about Putin.
Retired Admiral Stavridis also added, unless we stand up to this kind of cyber attack from Russia, we'll only see more and more of it in the future. But as the CIA continues to make plans, it is unclear if the White House administration is in full agreement on this cyber retaliation, as other options are also on the table. Now, it should be noted that the cyber attack cannot go forward without an order from the president.
Well, Yemenis in their thousands took part in the Ashura mourning ceremony observed by millions of Muslims worldwide. The ceremony marks the martyred anniversary of the third Shia Imam, Imam Hussein. The Yemenis people spoke out against those attacking them today, saying, like those tyrants from centuries ago who killed the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, Imam Hussein, they are still claiming the lives of innocent people who refuse to prove their allegiance to them.
One mourner told reporters from Press TV, "We have taken to the streets to commemorate Ashura. Despite the threat of Saudi airstrikes, The tyrants, represented by Saudi Arabia, the U.S., and Israel, must know that the people of Yemen will achieve victory against them.
Well, the leader of Yemen's Ansarullah movement, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, delivered a televised speech in which he pointed out the enemies of Islam, represented by Saudi Arabia, are not only wanting to murder the Yemen people and destroy the country's infrastructure, but they also seek to sow seeds of discord and disunity among Muslims. Well, men, women, and children alike participated in the Ashura mourning and demonstrations to show their support for the Muslim religion in the face of the Saudi-led bombing of their country. They also called upon the international community to put an end to the war in Yemen.
Both the demonstrations by the Yemenis people did not slow down the trouble in the war-torn country. As the Ashura ceremonies ended, attacks of a new kind began. Now, reports of the U.S. firing missiles into the Houthi rebel-controlled areas on the Arabian Peninsula came in early on October 13th. Now, it's interesting to note, Katan, this is the first time the U.S. Navy has fired onto one of the warring parties in the Yemeni civil war.
Oh, interesting. Well, the U.S. strike came after reports of the USS Mason, the Navy destroyer, was under attack from anti-ship missiles fired from the rebel-controlled territory in Yemen. While none of the missiles reached their target, the USS Nitze, a second destroyer in the Red Sea, launched cruise missiles at 3 unmanned radar stations, which were believed to be used in the attack against the U.S. Navy ship.
The U.S. believes that knocking out the radar will cause severe damage to the accuracy in future attacks by the Houthi rebels. Now, the weapons used in the attack on the Mason were reportedly an unsophisticated version of the Silkworm anti-ship missile, which itself has poor accuracy. However, they can put a fairly large warhead on it.
Oh, well. Now, previously, Washington only provided weapons and intelligence to Riyadh, which supports the internationally recognized Yemeni government. The U.S. claims their attacks were in remote areas where there was low risk of civilian casualties. In a statement by the Pentagon, the U.S. government insists their missile strikes were of a defensive nature, which the president approved.
Part of the Pentagon statement read, "These limited self-defense strikes were conducted to protect our personnel, our ships, and our freedom of navigation in this important maritime passageway. The United States will respond to any further threat to our ships and commercial traffic."
Well, the attack on the USS Mason was prompted by a Saudi-led airstrike on a funeral home in the rebel-held capital of Sana'a. Thousands protested in Yemen over the funeral bombing, where more than 1,000 people were in attendance. At least 155 people were killed and over 500 injured. Sana'a's mayor was among the victims of that airstrike.
The editor of the Pan-African Newswire told RT, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Cooperation Council are an integral part of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. They transport weapons to them on a regular basis. They just approved, he said, a few weeks ago, a massive arms sale and transferal to Riyadh. This is not going to stop. So kind of showing you who's behind supplying these weapons to the region.
Yeah, it seems like as long as there's weapons, the war will continue.
That's right.
Well, he continued, they utilized Saudi Arabia in regard to attacks on Syria as well as Iraq and Yemen. So Saudi Arabia is functioning as a foreign policy military wing of the United States Pentagon and the White House, as well as the State Department.
Now, the war in Yemen has claimed an estimated 10,000 lives so far, many of which have been civilians. And as we have reported previously, Saudi-led airstrikes have been mostly responsible, but have had the backing of American refueling planes and intelligence.
Well, adding on to that, YPN's Larry McGee has further details on bombings elsewhere in the Euphrates, increasing tensions with Russia, and the election platform of Mrs. Clinton. Larry, what do you have for us?
An important sit-down is reported to have taken place this week between the head of state and his chief advisors on foreign policy. The meeting was reportedly convened to mull over new military options with regard to Syria, with one of the most preferred notions being the possibility of arming U.S.-backed mercenaries or militia groups with more sophisticated weapons. The idea of direct airstrikes on the Syrian government is believed will also be discussed. And of course, there is also the hot-button topic of a no-fly zone, to which President Obama has expressed strong opposition in an effort, it is believed, to sidestep a direct confrontation with Russia. The outgoing president has been more inclined towards diplomacy, and in that vein, top diplomats from Russia, the U.S., Turkey, and Saudi Arabia are all scheduled to meet in Switzerland to revisit their efforts to pinpoint a diplomatic solution for Syria. The destruction of the ancient nation has been proceeding for 5 years now, with more than 300,000 people reported to have been killed thus far. The Euphrates is ablaze in other areas as well. Iran has stationed itself off the coast of Yemen after the retaliatory strike of the U.S. against Houthi rebels. The infamous Tomahawk missiles were reportedly fired from a warship in the Red Sea, bolstered by airstrikes from the Saudis. And that prompted Iran to dispatch its warships to the southern coast of Yemen, allegedly to protect its ships against piracy. America is defending its choice as a defensive measure designed to protect the U.S. Navy destroyer, but the decision has set off a ripple effect that could potentially escalate the conflict into a much bigger level, large enough, in fact, some analysts believe, to possibly eclipse the conflict in Syria as it develops from a regional into a global confrontation. The story goes that in 2 separate incidents, missiles were fired at U.S. warships off the Yemenis coast. America then authorized a strike against 3 radar sites in western Yemen, allegedly held by the Houthi militia, who are supported by Iran. Pentagon spokesperson Peter Cook says the move was a response to direct threats to the U.S. people and its ships, and if need be, Mr. Cook says the U.S. is prepared to respond again. Houthi fighters deny blame for the attacks, however, and Tehran also disbelieves American claims. As they see it, the whole ordeal was a setup designed to provide justification for America to directly intervene in the Yemeni conflict militarily, since analysts say Saudi Arabia had failed or was failing to get the job done. Back in the States, the U.S. is saddled with the challenge of convincing the public of its ability to succeed in solving the conflict in Yemen, when many see the stage set for the same sorts of failures that have been witnessed in Syria. To that, the State Department says that while some of the same ingredients involved in the approach with regard to Yemen are the same, the overall formula is different, and they believe it is the right one. Internationally, however, America is being seen as suspiciously inconsistent and motivated more by self-interest concerning its strategy in the Euphrates, since on one hand, in Yemen, they are supporting the democratically elected president, while in Syria, they are doing the exact opposite. President Putin, America's strongest opposition with regard to its agenda in the Tigris, spoke to a forum recently about what he asserts is the real story concerning international affairs. The Russian head said currently Russia is being blamed for everything with no proof. He offered as an example the attack on the humanitarian aid convoy. President Putin says Russia knows who hit it. It was one of the mercenary groups on the ground. He continued to say that America was also aware of it, but they preferred to blame Russia with no proof. This sort of behavior on an international level, he said, is called pressuring and blackmailing. With Russia, he stated, that has never worked and never will work. What the Clinton campaign is hoping will work, however, is the idea of American exceptionalism, which they are in hopes will attract new voters. The former senator and presidential candidate recently penned a letter promoting the idea, stating in it that the U.S. is indispensable because it has the greatest military in history with the best troops, training, and technology. She also stated that the U.S. is indispensable because of its network of alliances built up through decades of diplomacy. But with all of those advantages, Mrs. Clinton says, comes great responsibility. The U.S., she believes, must continue to lead the world. The concept of American exceptionalism is not a new one. It was actually the same angle used by President Obama during his campaign. But what many might find alarming is that the concept actually originated amongst German philosophers who also theorized that the idea would produce an increase in nationalism among the people. The problem, of course, is that that idea immediately conjures thoughts of swastikas in the minds of most. Historians say the former senator's position is framed to rationalize American hegemony and U.S. domination of the world. Political analysts like Gerald Horne say that the U.S. styles itself as the police officer of the earth. The problem is, he says, that no one appointed the United States to be the police officers of the earth. The author and historian also advised Mrs. Clinton to brush up on her history and study about the dispossession of the Native Americans and the enslavement of the Africans, which form the foundation of the United States. The analyst says that America is an exceptional nation, exceptional in its level of violence. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, Katan, that would definitely be the exceptionalism you wouldn't want to be associated with.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin blames Western countries, particularly the United States, for the deteriorating situation in Syria. Mr. Putin said, "I am deeply convinced it's our Western partners, first and foremost, of course, the United States, that are responsible for the situation that has prevailed in the region and in Syria in particular, and its allies, including, of course, leading European countries."
Putin also said that the U.S. thwarted the ceasefire in Syria by failing to encourage the moderate opposition to break ties with al-Qaeda-linked militants. He also dismissed the political rhetoric, French accusations, that Russian airstrikes against the Syrian city of Aleppo amounted to war crimes. He also emphasized that civilians should not be allowed to be used as human shields. Russia intervened in the Syrian conflict in 2015 at the request of Damascus.
The Russian upper house has recently given approval for the Russian air base to remain in Latakia permanently. Now, back in August of 2015, the use of the air base was agreed and signed before Russia started their military operation in Syria. Now, both houses of the Russian parliament have approved that planes can stay at the airbase for an unspecified period of time.
Well, the West has warned about possible action against Assad and his regime. Repercussions of that might lead to a military escalation between Russia and the U.S. Right now, what analysts are saying is what we're seeing is a political game of chess. So right now, we just have to wait for the next player to make their move.
In the latest developments in Syria, Russia Defense Ministry has vowed to shoot down any perceived threat. Now, this following claims from the press that the White House is considering strikes on Syrian army positions. Those targets would include Syrian Air Force airfields with cruise missiles and other long-range weapons. Now, this was a concern to Russia since they have personnel deployed at various air bases throughout Syria.
Well, in response, Russia has deployed S-400, its S-400 missile defense system, which is designed to shoot down airborne targets, including cruise ballistic missiles, as well as jets and helicopters. Now, Russia sees a serious threat to its personnel, if it does, in these latest plans to target Assad forces, and the Russian military defense made it quite clear of its plans in response to these actions.
Igor Konishnikov, the Russian Defense Ministry Major General, said, "I would like to remind the American strategists that the air cover is provided by the S-300 and S-400 weapon systems, the strike radius of which may be a surprise to any unidentified flying objects. I should also acknowledge that the anti-aircraft defenses won't have time through a direct line where the missiles are going or who it belongs to." In other words, Katan, they're not going to have time to check and verify the target. The missiles are going to do what they're intended to do.
Shoot first, ask questions later. No. In another development, Russia has also warned against supplying anti-aircraft missiles to terrorist groups in Syria. Maria Zakharova, the foreign ministry spokesperson for Russia, said, "We have noticed some Syrian opposition members demanding anti-aircraft missile launchers from original sponsors."
We hope that our original and other partners have enough common sense not to react to such demands. Russia will not allow anyone to threaten the life of any of its citizens or its service members, and any unfriendly actions towards Russia will not be left without consequences.
Well, many have wondered why the ongoing conflict in Syria. Well, here's one person's take on the war in Syria. We're going to take a look at a member from the UN Security Council on Peace and what she has to say regarding that quote-unquote civil war. Let's take a look.
This is not a civil war in Syria. That's probably the first thing we heard, and we heard it over and over again. It is not President Assad against his own people. It is President Assad and the Syrian people all together in unity against outside forces, outside mercenary forces, terror organizations, the names change every day or every other day to try to protect their identity and maybe keep the connection between the country that funded it and that group kind of a little bit more nebulous. But there are groups, mercenary forces supported by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United States, and underneath it, Israel, the state of Israel. And these outside mercenary forces are the ones that are terrorizing the Syrian people and are attempting to divide the Syrian people. I remember.
And lastly, amid rising territorial tensions in the South China Sea between Beijing and Washington, China is accusing the U.S. of intervention in Asia. The Chinese Defense Minister Cheng Wang-wan said some countries seek absolute military superiority and seek their own security at the cost of other countries' security. Now, these comments came at the recent 7th Annual Jingshan Regional Defense Forum in Beijing.
That's right. China experts exert sovereignty over the entire South China Sea, which is also partly claimed by a number of other Southeast Asian countries. Well, the U.S. has recently increased its military activity in the region, which has, of course, sparked China's reaction. Well, you don't have to have a college education to understand that the hatred of the nations is leading them to an all-out nuclear war, with, of course, 4/5 of the population eventually being killed. Scientists have already calculated that there will be no winners in a nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia. Yet, that's where it seems like the world is headed. There's only one prophesied place of protection, and that is the House of Yahweh. To hear more of the life-giving teachings of Yisrael Hawkins, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copies of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. And for any emails, you can email at info@yahweh.com. Any international calls, you can call the number on your screen. And once again, don't forget to go to www.yisraelsays.com for the latest and greatest Bible study tool on the market today. Just go ahead and ask any question, and you'll be amazed at the results.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.